Welcome back, everybody, to the In the Clutch podcast. I'm Cody Roskins, your host. Alongside me is Gavin Russell, Jonathan Michael, and our new guest for the day, Wes Huett. But first, Gavin, John, how are you guys' days been? Wes, I guess, as well. How are we feeling on this very gloomy Peoria Monday?
It's been all right, aside from the weather, but we're supposed to warm back up, and, high school football has been heating up a lot, too, so it's been pretty exciting so far. Excited to talk a little bit more about it with you guys.
Gavin, I heard the football bug bit you pretty hard.
Yeah, it sure did. Played a little pickup football after school today. Definitely came out with a few injuries, but did not lose, so that definitely a good thing there.
And then, of course, our guest today, Mr. Wes Huett from the Peoria Journal Star. Wes, how are we doing?
Very good. Yeah, my pickup game is limited to playing catch with my 10-year-old son in the backyard. I'm not looking to be messing around with any college kids in the quad. So,
Fair
end
enough.
up with a full hamstring.
Put him on the 10-day IL.
Oh, yeah.
No, probably IR.
Questionable for next week.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we've got a lot to dive into this week. It was an action-packed last Friday. Gavin, John, both of you guys were on the call for a really good game, and it was kind of an eye-opener. People called me a maniac for that Washington pick, picking over each team to score 20+. What was kind of the breakdown of Washington and Metamora?
Yeah, so, it was just, first of all, I just want to say it did not disappoint. It was the first time I ever called a Washington Metamora game after, working on the CSM crew for many years. I'd always wanted to, be a part of, Panthers Redbirds on the call. It was, phenomenal game. It was just back and forth for the first half, and then, and then Washington's kind of just, blew it open. Those two blocked punts. Gavin, it seems like we see something different every week. It's like, we see the craziest things, and we did see everything in that game. We saw a safety that came off of an intentional grounding penalty. We saw the two blocked punts. I saw a couple of kick returns. A couple, fumbled, muffed, returns as well. So again, really did have everything. Washington really, really impressed me though. Their offense was firing on all cylinders for the first time this year. And Metamora, they also played a great game as well. But a couple, costly mistakes, and that game was a lot closer than the 44-22 final score indicated. So I think Metamora, maybe just a couple bounces the right way, a couple punts that they could have gotten off. I think we're looking at a much closer, maybe even a different result.
Yeah, I got to agree with John there. I think that was a game that was much, much closer than what the final score indicates. It looks like Washington beat them pretty good if you just look at the final score. But again, watching this game, it was pretty close for most of it. I'm really impressed with Washington's special teams and defense as a whole. There's several individuals we could name. Carter Perina came up with one of those big block punts that was able to get returned for a touchdown. Those are not things that you see all the time, and I wouldn't expect, Washington to be able to rely on blocking punts every single week. But those are the big plays that young teams can really thrive on. And again, they have a short-term memory. They had a really rough first 2 weeks. I think that this is any indication of what Washington can be in the next year or two. They're going to be back to their top-tier level that we expect them to be at while still being pretty good in the present. As for Metamora, they've been in a bit of a rut, but I was impressed with Mark Frederick, the sophomore running back. He had a few nice runs in that game. And again, I think they'll find some more consistency. They just got to kind of get their season back on track going forward.
Yeah, think about Washington. I think they got Jake Stewart back under center, which I thought was an interesting choice. They have that Wisconsin transfer, Preston Nelson, who played a little bit last week. Getting Jake, I feel like their offense ran a lot more smoothly this week with Stewart at quarterback. I kind of knew they were a little better than their two first games indicated. Played a pair of really tough teams in Highland and Kankakee, and Daryl Crouch is just a great. I've been covering these Metamora Washington things for a decade plus, and they're always great games. They're always Washington always tends to show up, and Daryl's a great coach. One of the biggest things is coaching effort, and it's effort and just consistency. And I really think when you have, I think their talent level is a little bit of a dip right now, but you're still not going to see the a lack of effort at all. So I think once these kids start to figure out the system and they get the line situated, It wouldn't surprise me if they end up in the playoffs, honestly, despite the first 2 weeks of the season. It was just really full disclosure. I live in Washington now, and I have a kid in the JFL system, so I'm a little closer to it but I think I've remained objective enough to see what a good team is, and Daryl's a great coach, and so is Jared too. So, I mean, Metamora is certainly going to right the ship at some point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to stand on, Wes. We were talking about it last week. It's one, Washington doesn't get beat around at home, and so you knew kind of already going in with the question marks that Metamora had, especially still on offense, because we still hadn't seen them play 2 full games, and some of the struggles they had with LP last week. It was kind of like, well, really, what's the standard for Metamora's offense? And I think we kind of got a clear picture of that. And on the other hand, we saw Washington. One, their crowd was just absolutely insane. They were going bananas. And then their offense finally found a little bit of rhythm. And like John said, when they are able to win within the margins that typically don't get put into the stat sheet, whether it is, again, those miscellaneous plays where it's a blocked punt, I think that only boosts that. And I'm just not sure there was a way that after those first couple miscues happened for the Redbirds that there was much calming them down. I'm not sure if anybody else saw it differently, but once I got the reports of the special teams definitely in favor of Washington, I'm like, that was a fast of the game Metamora had to win, and they didn't.
Well, I think it's interesting is that going back to what I was talking about with effort and hustle are things that special teams thrive on, and it doesn't take a ton of talent to try your best in the hustle. Actually, there's literally a sign on the locker room door at Washington that says, like, we don't expect you to be the best. We just expect you to try your best. And so it's all about effort. It's all about hustle. And on special teams, obviously, that stuff shines through.
Yeah. I think that once those when those big plays happen, at those back-to-back blocked punts. I mean, the first one obviously Prina recovered it in the end zone, and we got to remember that that touchdown would not have happened. It likely would not have happened if it wasn't for the sack by linebacker Eli Pappas. That was a big 15-yard loss. Put him back at I think about the 15 or 20-yard line or so. And Metamora was actually a couple plays ago was near midfield. They got called for a holding penalty, which brought them back 10. Then they had the sack, which they lost 15, and then they got their punt blocked. So I mean, a matter of a handful of plays, they go from midfield to giving up a touchdown in their own end zone off a blocked punt, which was just a huge momentum shift. And for the first quarter or two, I mean Metamora struck, and Washington struck, then Metamora struck, and Washington struck, and it was like, all right, well, is this thing going to come down to who has the ball last? And then Washington just finally decided, like, hey, we're gonna be the ones to make a play, and really ended up paying off for them. And one other thing I wanted to mention was just like how well a couple underclassmen played. Gavin mentioned Mark Frederick, the sophomore running back for the Redbirds, ended up with 140 yards. When Cam Davis of Metamora was getting stuffed at the line, they brought in Frederick, and he did some really nice things. And then the freshman wide receiver for Washington, A.J. Jones, was really impressive. He had a couple runs where he was in motion, and they kind of pitched it off to him and kind of like an end around. And then he also caught right after with the second block punt, caught a 29-yard touchdown pass, and really then those 2 plays really just kind of energized the crowd. So give credit to both teams underclassmen for stepping up big in a spotlight game. So.
Yeah, and we had one other game that went on this last Friday, and it was kind of the big game in the Mid-Illini. I mean, it's hard to say that with Washington and Metamora playing each other, but Pekin and Dunlap, that was a game that had a lot of, if, ands, and buts around it. One, could Dunlap slow down the backfield of Pekin? Could Pekin, survive a big test on the road? There's all these question marks, and for the most part, Pekin answered a lot of those questions, but when John Camosa and I were on the call for that game for ESPN Radio, Dunlap just could not get out of their own way, whether it was penalty yardage, interceptions in the red zone. I mean, Madden Burke might be one of the most electric quarterbacks I've seen play in a while, because he was scrambling around, not necessarily for his life, but because it was the best offense that they had. They couldn't really run between the tackles, and so that kind of concerns me for Dunlap. But he kind of has that Brett Favre trait to him, where you're going to take the good and the bad, because there's a lot of both, especially when it comes to decision-making down in tight windows. And there was a 2-point game after Dunlap had gone down and scored a touchdown. They were kicking off. Pekin fumbles the ball at the 50-yard line. Dunlap jumps on it, and you think, okay, the lid on this game is about to get blown off. And Madden Burke on 2nd down and 10 has a chance, to scramble forward, get a couple of yards. Instead, he steps up and tries to fit it into a tight window and underthrows the ball, and it's picked off. And from there, Pekin scores, and the game's over. But from the outside perspective, I mean, what did you guys see about that game? I thought it was more or less about Pekin weathering the storm, and Dunlap kind of, kept shooting themselves in the foot, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get to really, catch any of that game. Of course, we were over in Washington, Metamora, but, kind of looking at some of the aftermath of it, it's a pretty close final score. I will say this about Pekin. Pekin's very impressive, but they haven't been quite as explosive as they've been as they were in the first week when they played Rock Island. They really showed off in that week 1 game against Rock Island. Now, granted, they've been on the road the last couple of weeks. They played a big school in Belleville East. They played a tough Mid-Illini opponent in Dunlap. Dunlap is always very well coached. They're always going to play a tough physical brand of football. They're going to be solid in the trenches. They got plenty of seniors this year to rely on. But at the end of the day, Pekin was able to grind it out for the win. It doesn't always have to be the most explosive. Just survive and advance. I always see on their Twitter, championship effort. Got to give that effort. And Wes was mentioning about how Washington just prides themselves on that sort of effort and that grit. That's what you really need to do to grind out these wins, especially as we get into the middle of the season. And then kind of going for Dunlap, I mean, it's been a tough break for them early in the year. They've had a couple of tough losses. I think they'll find a little more consistency, but definitely some concern with the penalties and things, because those are things that you can limit. I think Dunlap more so beat themselves. I think, though, there's still some question marks surrounding Dunlap, and the next couple of weeks will tell us a little more about what kind of team they are.
No, I think that's what makes Pekin an interesting team to me, is that I think they can do a lot of things well. They can run the ball. They have a couple of great running backs, obviously, we know, with Kanye Tyler and Tanner Sprecher, and then, of course, Scotty Jordan at quarterback. And I think they're kind of designed to keep games close, honestly. And I do think they're going to – it's that brand of bigger school football, the 7A, 8A, 6A football, where I think when they meet teams, they're not looking to blow anybody out. They're not looking – they're going to keep games close and just find ways to win. Dunlap's obviously, I think they're a lot of youth at the skill positions, and the line's a little bit, obviously, as Gavin said, the line has some seniority there, but that's the thing under Brett Kazan. Brett's a great coach, but they've never really sort of emphasized running between the tackles, like you said, Cody. That's something they've always kind of struggled to get going, and I think he always wants to. It's just a matter of whether or not they can pull it off, and I think that's kind of, again, Brett Kazan's always sort of a pass-first type of coach. He has been from his days back before he came to Dunlap, and now at Dunlap. I think that's kind of what they want to do. And again, you're always going to have growing pains with a younger team when you want to have an offense like that. And it's weird. It's like back when probably 10+ years ago, there was a ton of turnover in Mid-Illini when it came to coaching, and to have guys like Brett Kazan and Doug Nutter and back to Gerald Crouch and Grebner, these guys have been around a while, and they're starting to really – it's really nice to see them building these programs up, and especially Doug Nutter. He's a limestone guy from way back in the day, in the 90s, and then he had some time with River Valley. I don't know if you guys remember that school. There was a program – it really, really struggled. It was – I don't know if they won a game. They went stretches of years without winning a game, and then I believe they disbanded the program. He cut his teeth at that program. And then finally he's found a nice landing spot with Pekin in the last decade or so, and has really built a nice program there.
Oh, all right. I guess we're going to be now. Okay, cool. Well, anyway, on that note, yeah. So again, like Gavin, I didn't actually see the Pekin Dunlap game, although I have a couple sources of people I know in the Peoria area, especially a lot in Dunlap. So I was able to to kind of get a lowdown of that game, even though I was not there. And Wes was right. There was a lot of flags from what I heard. So Dunlap really just kind of shot themselves in the foot. Is what I heard. What happened in that game, and obviously with the 4 picks from Madden Burke, obviously did not help. But Cody, like you said, I saw Madden Burke a little bit last year, and he really is a really fun quarterback to watch or whatever. But I think him and Dunlap need to be more consistent. And again, like Wes said, that starts with running the ball, because a good run game usually can travel week to week and everything, and they certainly have the backs to do it. They've had a couple really good backs in recent memory, such as Mitchell Gore, and that now this year they have Braden Orr. They have a sophomore who I'm real familiar with. His name is Joe Weeks or whatever. He's playing a little bit of varsity this year, but he's a real bruiser, real tough to bring down. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see, again, do they bring in someone like Weeks to try and get tough between the tackles, and maybe just bring some toughness and grit to their offense. But Dunlap does always have good receivers. They always have a pretty decent quarterback as well. So but it all boils down to consistency. I think Dunlap, they always have the pieces to put it together, but it just kind of depends of which Dunlap team is going to show up. That's something we talked with Brett Callis about before the season. Is he said last year, and I think I mentioned this on a podcast a couple weeks earlier, there were a couple times where we looked like we were the best teams around, a couple times where we didn't look like we should even be a varsity squad. So it's just kind of which Dunlap are you going to see? But I think they definitely do have the potential to make the playoffs, make a deeper run in the playoffs potentially. And Pekin obviously probably a little bit of a closer win than what they're expected, or from what they're used to the last 2 weeks. But I think that kind of win is important because they're going to learn that they're not going to beat teams like Rock Island by 35-40 like they did in week 1 when Gavin and I were there, because they're going to have to grind out these games in the Mid-Illini because there are really no true off weeks here. You got Morton, you got Metamora, you got you got Washington, and then you have teams like Canton that can sneak up on you. East Peoria could sneak up on you too if you're not careful enough as well. So yeah, I think it's good that they got some close game experience, but again, like Wes said, I do think that they are a team that can thrive in those close game situations. They have a lot of experience returning, and I really do truly think that this is the Dragons' year to put it all together.
Yeah, we'll touch more on them here in just a second, but we're going to transition into one of our favorite segments here in the Clutch podcast. It's our 3 words or less segment. We're going to start first with Jonathan Michael, then we'll go to Gavin, then myself, and then we'll end with Wes. John, what do you have here for us for your 3 words or less?
So my 3 words were open it up, and that is referring to the Mid-Illini. I know a lot of people, said that after 2 weeks, Pekin's the favorite, and me and Gavin talked about this on the broadcast as well. And I think they still are the favorite. However, I think the possibilities are a lot more open now because given how close that Dunlap played Pekin, they could have easily won that game. And a lot of people were also ready to write Washington off as well, given how badly they lost the first 2 weeks. Obviously, they're playing 2 great teams, but you don't expect a team like the Panthers to lose by that much. But again, Washington really impressed. I think a couple things go their way, and if they have more time to gel, I think certainly Daryl Crouch has has the experience, he has the guys and the effort available to make a run in the Mid-Illini. Pekin's obviously in the mix. Morton continues to look good after getting beat pretty good by Muhammad Seymour the first week. But, Carl Whitaker is emerging as a real threat in their backfield. And I don't know if enough people are talking about him because, he's putting up maybe not quite Seth Glass numbers, but he's coming pretty close. He's, over 100, I think, almost every week, if not every week so far this year. I think he might have broke 200 this past week anyway. So Morton's obviously in the mix, Metamora, I think, they have a few things to work on, but, again, they're going to be in contention for a playoff berth, and, who knows if they reel off a couple wins against, the likes of Morton, Washington, Pekin, they can find themselves in the mix for a Mid-Illini title week 8, week 9 as well. So I think, given how close the Pekin Dunlap game was and, and how well Washington looked, I think, the Mid-Illini is truly wide open now rather than, Pekin being the fairly clear front runner.
Yeah, so I'm going to take it to the Big 12 now. We've done a lot of Mid-Illini talk, but Big 12, Peoria High rolls. That's my 3 words for the week. And I'm a big proponent of Peoria High and the job that Tim Thornton has done over there. He's done a fantastic job. And, on the couple occasions I've got to talk to him, he's just a great guy. They've built such an amazing program when he took over. I believe it was 2010, 2011, something like that when he came over from formerly Woodruff. But just this year's team, having watched them for several years now and having watched their state championship year and things, this is probably the most complete team that I've seen since probably 2016, 2017 from Peoria High. They've had great individuals come through, but it doesn't just take one or two players to have all the success. It takes a whole village. It takes the entire team, and that's why I think that they're rolling so far early in the year. Of course, they didn't get a complete game in week one, but I think they're outscoring opponents in their first 3 weeks. Like they've scored 134 points or something like that, while just giving up like 16 in each of their first 3 games. Again, not a full game in week one against Metamora, but they have rolled over pretty much all of their opponents so far. They've played 2 of their first 3 games on the road. They went down to Cahokia, definitely, played a tough game down there and came out with a big win. They've got some home games left on the slate. And again, they just have a lot of talented players that I think are just going to keep getting better throughout the year. I mean, look at the job that TQ Webb has done. Just a sophomore coming out, catching some big passes. Tino Gist, just a junior, making some big strides there. And, of course, they have some really important seniors as well. Landon Newby-Holsome, Ricky Hearn Jr., Taywon Smith. There's a lot going for the Lions right now, and I think that they should be one of the most feared, if not the most feared team in Central Illinois.
Yeah, they definitely have one of the best offenses in the state, period. But now that they've got a defense to kind of protect just about any lead that they can give them, I think that'll be kind of the difference than it has been in years past. I think that's a great take, Gavin. But for mine, we're going to go back to the Mid-Illini, and you're going to like it, Gavin. If Pekin proves a point, Pekin, for whatever reason, whatever test you put in front of them, they've passed so far. In their first, I would say, big, not necessarily trap game of the year, but first big test game of the year, they played Dunlap on the road. They had a Dunlap team that, for whatever reason, just never went away. Dunlap even had the ball, or not necessarily last, but with a chance to go down and potentially win the game when it was a 2-point game in the fourth quarter after that fumbled kickoff. But Pekin took about every single advantage they could on offense. They took every possession they had. They either went down and scored or pinned Dunlap super deep. But I think Tanner Sprecher really emerged as a back in the backfield. They put Kanye Tyler quite a bit out at wide receiver this last game. I think that was kind of to spread out a good secondary that they knew Dunlap would have because they are really good at the skill position players, even though they may be a little young, especially on the back end. But whether it was turnovers in the red zone or Dunlap, finding opportunities to take the ball back, I mean, they passed any test they gave them, and for that, I'm giving them the credit for proving their point that I think, this is their conference to lose at this point. Obviously, it's week 3, and everybody kind of, to a degree, controls their own destiny, but it's going to take a lot for Pekin to drop a game this year. And for the team that does it, I would love to see how, because Dunlap used the blueprint perfectly. You keep the ball away from him, you play good defense in the red zone, and it still wasn't quite enough. And so for that, I'm giving Pekin my nod.
Yeah, well, when you asked me for 3 words, the first thing that came to mind was Gabriel Ziegler-Harris. As an East Peoria grad myself, it's nice to see them winning some games. This kid's got 400 yards, 10 touchdowns the last 2 weeks. He was your guest. Was it last week?
Yep.
He was your guest. He does prefer to be called Gabriel, which we heard from his mother, by the way. He might not tell you that, but according to all the social media and all of the stuff in the paper, we've been informed by his mom's been in contact with us. Mainly because, well, for one, we misspelled his name at one point. We had it Z-I-E instead of Z-E-I. And then she's also been great. She's emailing our editor asking for papers so she can put it in the scrapbook. And it's great. It's awesome. The best thing, I've been covering high school sports for 25 years. And while it's fun to predict, like, when people are going to be good and those types of things, the best time is when things don't go as planned. Because then you get to tell all these cool new stories and spotlight new athletes and spotlight new programs. And I just love the idea that we get to talk about East Peoria football instead of talking about the same old. To talk about Dustin Jefferson and the job he's doing there at East Peoria, former Illini player who's now just getting his brains beat in at East Peoria for years and years. But yeah, no, it's just so cool he's kind of, Gabriel is filling that vacuum that we kind of lost with Seth Glatz graduating, and he's just kind of being that stud athlete of like, okay, how many touchdowns is he going to score this week? And they have another nice matchup with Canton, which of course I think Cody's going to talk about later. But yeah, that's my 3 words: Gabriel Ziegler-Harris.
Yeah, he is for sure, Wes. I think definitely taking the mantle of Central Illinois athlete, especially in the football season, and kind of running with it, especially with just he is by far obviously the most talented player on his team, but it helps that he's making others around him better, and it's kind of showing now, especially as that upperclassman role. But as we go along, we've got 2 games, one of them on a unique site, another one with a lot of Mid-Illini implications, and we'll go ahead and start first with you, Gavin. We've got Washington at Pekin. This will be the 1 week where you're kind of on the in the bullpen role, getting a little bit of rest, especially after your little pickup injuries. What are we kind of looking for at Washington at Pekin? It'll be our video stream game for this Friday. What are we looking for, and who are we looking out for?
Well, I am excited to be in this bullpen role, coming as a closer this week. There's going to be a lot of games to follow, so I'm definitely going to have my eye on, checking the scores, probably tuning into you guys, listen a little bit, of course, keeping a very close eye on this Washington-Pekin game. I think this is a game that is another one for Pekin. Although they are at home, I think going through a tough early Mid-Illini schedule like they played Dunlap, which team is going to be able to exactly figure them out first? I don't know, maybe John was saying it or if Cody was saying it, where the kind of the blueprint of, things to do and how exactly to beat them. What can Washington look at the film from last week about how they played and also how Pekin played and kind of try to do a few more things to replicate that. Now, it's no easy environment to go to Pekin. Pekin's got a great crowd, big stadium. It's going to be loud in there. Washington will travel well, of course, but it's going to be a high-stakes game. I think Pekin is, of course, the favorite in this game, but Washington's got more momentum than anybody expected them to. What can they do? It's just about consistency. Wes was saying, they're probably not the most talented that they've been in recent years, but it's the effort. Can the effort alone get them to win? I think that's kind of up to Pekin. Pekin, I think, really controls how this game goes. If Pekin shoots himself in the foot, they don't necessarily do all the things they're supposed to do. They can leave the door open for Washington, which is very possible. If Pekin handles business on the home field, I think the Dragons could come out with a big win. There's just a lot of variables here that we'll kind of have to see as we go along Friday night.
Oh yeah, so for Washington Pekin, I do not think I will be out at that broadcast, but those are 2 teams that I have gotten to see so far, and just like Gavin said, I think if Pekin does shoot themselves in the foot, which they did a little bit of as well against Dunlap, even though the Eagles may have done it to maybe a bit of a more extent, but if they do that, I think that could allow Washington to sneak in there, and I think the Panthers' offense they got to feel real confident after putting up 44 points. Obviously, not all those 44 were because of their offense. A lot of it was by their defense, but you got to give Jake Stewart and Kenan McQuarrie and the rest of the guys for the Panthers on the offensive end. You got to give them some credit because they had been frankly quieted almost entirely for the first 2 weeks of the season. They're gonna have a test against Pekin's defense, which I think is definitely overlooked. Obviously, you talk about Kanye Tyler and Tanner Sprecher a bunch and all their offensive weapons, but Pekin's defense is also really nice as well. Rock Island, we saw them week 1. They really shut down their run game from the Rocks, and which has been a hallmark of Rock Island for over a decade. So they have a lot of good linebackers, a couple of guys in the line as well that that can really make some tackles. Kanye Tyler he's also a force at free safety as well. So I think it's going to be a pretty close matchup. I think that one actually will come down to the fourth quarter in that one. So big matchup on tap for both teams. Can't wait to see the outcome.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I think this reminds me a little bit. Again, only my frame of reference. There was a stretch where Washington was seemingly making the state quarterfinals every year, probably about 5 to 7 years ago. And I remember Darryl Krause telling me that Pekin, I don't care. He's like, I don't care how good Pekin is talent-wise. They're always going to come out and punch you in the mouth, and they're going to give us a game. And he was always right. It seemed like Pekin always gave them a game. And now it feels like kind of the roles are reversed here, that Pekin has the talent, and they're the ones who are supposed to win, and Washington's kind of this little engine that could. And I think the same thing's going to happen. Like Jonathan said, I do think it's going to come down to the last possession or two and who makes the fewer mistakes. And Washington, again, like I said, they struggled those first 2 weeks, but I think they're a lot better than they let on. I think they're better with Jake Stewart under center. They just seem more consistent. They want to run the ball, control the clock. you run the ball and control the clock. I mean, those are the hallmarks of winning football. So it would not shock me if they win this game. I don't think they will, but it would shock me if they do.
Yeah, that's a great point, Wes. That's kind of the blueprint I think teams are kind of realizing with teams like Pekin, where they've just got a really good explosive offense and they got a defense that's going to keep everything in front of them. Is you want to chew the clock, keep the ball away, don't shoot yourselves in the foot. And Dunlap, to their credit, last week did all but one of those things, and they just couldn't capitalize in the red zone. But people are forgetting Washington went into Pekin last year and pulled one out from the fire on the road. That was Pekin's homecoming. Joey Wright and I were on the call for that on ESPN Radio. And Isaac Mapson went up in double coverage in the corner of the end zone. I think they got the ball with a minute and 12 left. Pekin had just gone down, scored a touchdown to take the lead. Pekin's defense keeps everything in front of them. They've got a pivotal 4th and 8. They give up a hook and ladder for a first down. Washington sidelines going crazy. The Orange Crush that traveled, like Gavin said, they'll bring their student section. So this might be a matchup of the two best student sections in the area as well. And people forget Washington could easily have lost that game because they went for 2 on the road for the win instead of going for the PAT and playing for overtime, and Borges was able to find a way to get his Panthers the win. And it's going to be a close one. I think I'm right there with you, John. I think Washington looks at that tape from Dunlap last week and be like, okay, these guys, it's kind of like that phrase in Rocky, they bleed. Well, Pekin obviously was cut up a little bit last week, but same time, let's not, put Pekin down on the count. This is a team that should take care of business, especially at home. Everything we've seen from them suggests that they will. But Jonathan, you and I have got a really exciting game coming up Friday. Me and you are going actually right across the street from where I'm sitting right now. We're going to go to Dozer Park, and we're going to go do Peoria, Notre Dame, and Richwoods for our ESPN radio game. John, what are we thinking, man? How excited are we?
Well, I have even more excitement coming into this game after seeing that that P&D is in fact they Obviously, I don't think they were, really a favorite in the Big 12. I think that goes to Peoria High, but but they lost to Bloomington this past weekend. This Bloomington team, it's been a little bit up and down year, so far for them. I mean, it's only been 3 weeks, but they just barely snuck past Richwoods in week 1. Didn't have quite such a good showing in week 2. He came back and beat P&D, which I thought P&D was going to win that game. Pretty handily. So, but Bloomington is for real. But and then obviously Richwoods, that's the team that looking to kind of just establish an identity. Kind of get back on track. I think they're looking for that signature win. They haven't had an on-field win, I believe, since 2019. I think their only win since then was a forfeit against Urbana. So. Obviously, it's a huge chance for Richwoods to come out and just really kind of say, hey, we're still here, we never left, and everything. And I think the key for Richwoods in that game is going to be their defense. Their offense is doing pretty good. Quarterback Greg Burnside and Corey Weisinger are putting up some good numbers this year, and I fully expected both of them to have a great season. They definitely are, but I think it just really comes down to the nice defense. They're averaging. Giving up almost 40 a game. And when I talked to head coach Jim Ulrich before the season started, he said really the main thing for us is tackling. Something they really struggled with last year. And with P&D's ground game, they're going to come at you for 30, 40 times at least on the ground. So I think it's how well will Richwoods hold up after 4 quarters of getting having to defend the run. And if they're up to the task, if they this is a game where it really shows where that summer weightlifting, summer workouts show, because I think they're going to be put in the grinder by P&D. If they can come out with with a win or at least make it close, I think it's going to be a big statement for Richwoods, a big confidence builder going forward. And I said Dozer Park, that's a heck of an environment. I haven't seen a game there yet, and I'm just thrilled to be there. It's going to be a what heck of an environment. 2 cross-town rivals, can't really ask for much more.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun game, and I know you guys are going to enjoy that. I was able to go a couple years ago, Peoria High and Notre Dame squared off there at Dozer Park. That's a lot of fun to watch. But, kind of looking at this game, both these teams have been kind of all over the place this year. And, Richwoods at times, in brief portions, like when you guys covered them out in Morton, Cody, you and John Camosa, there was a period in that game where they looked like they were pretty in it and then just kind of melted down. I think more so than anything with both of these teams, and this is something that I've observed from a number of different teams, outside of just Richwoods and Notre Dame, but how big confidence and momentum plays a role, especially in high school football, because when kids, you've got a lot of players on one team, right? Everybody's got to believe that they can go out and win and that they can compete, that they're not just going to go out and get rolled over. Rich Woods hasn't had that win in a while, and that's something that a lot of these guys haven't been able to experience. Much why I think East Peoria wasn't winning games as all. These guys weren't experiencing wins, and the current class of guys had never experienced the win up until this year. You get one, you build a lot of confidence, and then see how they've gotten two in a row. So I think this is a big time for both Notre Dame and Richwoods to kind of break that seal. I know Notre Dame's a little more used to the winning, but it's about building momentum and confidence, and I think that's something that neither team has a whole lot of right now. They've had a tough early schedule. Richwoods, for instance, hasn't played a ton of games. They won't play a ton of games at home early in the year. They've got Normal West next week. I mean, that's another really tough game. Peoria High after that. They just got to find some ways to take some positives. And this is a really good opportunity. I think a very winnable game for Richwoods, although I think P&D would be the favorite. It's just going to come down again to a lot of those variables and which team can kind of carry the momentum through the four quarters.
Yeah, it's really interesting that Richwoods is. It's funny how you guys talk about confidence and winning, and I mean Richwoods is one of the premier iconic programs in the Peoria area, and up until this last half dozen years or so, really like a perennial playoff team. Honestly, under previous coaches, Roland Brown and Doug Simper, and then obviously before that Rod Butler and all the just. I mean, they were right there with Metamora. Like those are the teams that define Peoria area football. And to see them struggling is honestly a little bit of a surprise. I think it's just a matter of time before things start to turn around for them. I think the Shield is too proud, as they say, to be down for this long. They have a nice set of talented kids. Yeah, it's interesting. This game is great too. I love it. The game you mentioned there, Gavin, was that the 82-80 game that you saw?
No, that was not. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, this was a different one. I think this was probably about 2018 or 2017. It's a little while.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there was. I think Notre Dame and Peoria High played like one of the highest scoring games in the history of the state in this Shamrock Classic. I don't think we'll quite get to those numbers on Friday, but it is certainly a cool place to watch a game and a cool atmosphere for the kids involved.
Yeah, John, I know you and we texted as soon as we found out. That's our slip for this Friday, and we'll get to hang out at my place and walk across the street. It won't have to drive out of traffic. I will say, getting out of Dunlap last week, their traffic, that is a nightmare. I sat in that parking lot for like 45 minutes trying to get out of there.
Dunlap is the worst. Dunlap, it's a sneaky. I'm talking about back in the days when the Journal Star had a real deadline. After games, I'd have to rush back to the newspaper and get a story filed, right? And it is crazy. For one, A, how long it takes to get out of the parking lot. And two, how sneaky long it is to get from Dunlap back to Peoria.
It is ridiculous.
I'm like, it's like 25 minutes. And I'm here pushing deadline, and I got to run into the – and of course, as I was talking about before, Caslett's thrown the ball 35 times a game, so the clock's stopping every other down. And it's just like, back in those days when I had to write a 15-minute story in 12 minutes.
And there's really only one way in and one way out of Dunlap for the most part.
It's that one driveway.
There's another way that you can actually get out of Dunlap, but it's very roundabout. You got to go east over to Knoxville, and you got to go down. I don't know, that probably doesn't save that much time, honestly. So
well, I learned an old trick. I finally learned a trick where you get there early enough and you park way out near the exit of the parking lot, and so you're basically walking past traffic to your car, and then you get in your car and you can buzz right out. So all those old journalism tricks of parking. You get there early, you think, I get a spot up front. No, you get a spot near the exit.
Yeah, me and John Camosa's got to go to WMBD every night, and so I was saying, John, I'm parking out by the exit, and we have to do post-game wrap-up, and so I was telling him to get going. And when I got to my car, I could still see his car sitting further up the road, and I'm like, he didn't get out in time. But that'll be a nice little caveat. We'll get the great game, get the great venue, and we'll get to walk right across the street, John, so you can come hang out with me. We'll get that done. But, guys, we're going to take 30 seconds each on this next segment. Of course, it's another fan favorite, the 2-minute drill. So we'll start first with Gavin. then we'll go to John, and then we'll go to myself, and then we'll end up with Wes. You get 30 seconds to break down your game under the radar, and then we'll shift our hot take and bold predictions once everybody gets done with their games. Gavin, go ahead and take it away.
All right, so game that's flying under the radar, Normal West at Richmond Burton. This is not a game that a lot of people would probably suspect just because it's not like a local area game. It's a non-conference game. But Richmond Burton is 3-0. I believe they went to the state semifinals in the playoffs last year in Class 4A. They're a real good team. I don't know a whole lot about them. All I know is Normal West has been real good this year. Richmond Burton has been very good this year. This could be a big turning point for West to take some more momentum as West kind of looks to be another favorite in the Big 12 Conference. Keep your eye on this game. Could be a fun non-conference matchup.
Yeah, I had Bloomington and Danville, so both those teams are 2-1. Obviously, Bloomington coming off a big 18-12 win over P&D, and both teams are two teams that went 4-5 last year in the Big 12, and so there's really splitting hairs on their playoff eligibility and everything, and I think it's going to be largely the same this year. Although both teams I think have looked impressive enough that that I think they definitely do have playoff potential. But the winner of this game, I think, is really going to have an upper hand. I'll even go as far as say that the winner of this game, I think, will make the playoffs. The loser could definitely still do it, I think. But I think they're two real evenly matched teams. Danville's been pretty impressive so far. They have a fairly easy schedule as well too. So I was looking at it earlier today. It wouldn't be surprised me to see Danville go 6-3, maybe even 7-2 if they can pull off a big win. So I'm excited to see what both teams can do. Haven't seen either of them this year, but I think that'll be a good game to watch in the Big 12.
Yeah, that's a great call, John. We're going to go back to Wes and Gavin's pride and joy, EP and Canton. It's a big game for EP. They're looking for what would be 3-1 to start to get off to the season. It's kind of like that college game day feel, right, Gavin? If they win this one, they're making a case for us to go out and see them. And for Canton, man, they kind of got the ball shoved down their throats by Morton, and they're going to get a heavy dose of Gabriel Ziegler-Harris coming this Friday. And so it's going to be kind of, do they bow their necks? Do the Little Giants have that kind of scrap and claw mentality coming into this game? And for the other side is EP. I mean, it's kind of silly to say, but you look at a winless Canton team. Are you thinking, okay, maybe we got a couple? Are we trying to step past this? And I think they're going to have a really great contest. And,
Playoffs.
Yeah, send them in. And on that note, we'll go ahead and send it over to Wes and his game under the radar.
Looking at Elmwood at Stark County. It's really cool to see Elmwood back on top. 3-0 right now. Stark County's 2-1. Two great coaches, Todd Hollis, Jade Nord. Lincoln Trail Prairie Land crossover too, which is kind of interesting because next year those two leagues are coming together for a big time 17-team mega conference. So I think Peoria football is better when Elmwood Brimfield is good. Todd Hollis is one of the best, not only best coaches, best men that you'll ever know. And it's just really cool to see his program doing well, and I think that's a great. And Jade Nord's a great guy too, and a great coach as well. So you really can't go wrong there. You can just show up and watch some good football.
Absolutely, and as we said earlier, we're going to go down to our hot take and bold predictions. Reading off people's records: Gavin 0 for 2, Jonathan Michael 1 of 2, me 2 for 2, and then we'll have Wes kick off our special guest segment. So he is 0-0. We'll kick it off with you, Gavin, first.
Gabe won by just being here last week, right? So
yeah, he is undefeated. He's undefeated. So we'll give him the win. So Gavin, go ahead and take it away.
Well, I'm 0 for 2, put up a couple big donuts. First time I put a lot of eggs into the basket of Peoria football. They did not do so well for me. DMAC didn't come out with it last week, but I'm going, a little bit bold here just because they've been in a bit of a rut. But I'm going to go Metamora. I was going to get back on track and beat Morton. Now, that's kind of a bold prediction because Morton's been better to start the year. Metamora, again, a stat to go back on is they're 1-7 in their last 8 games they've played dating back to last year. So they've had kind of a tough stretch, but it's Malone Field. It's Friday night. Everybody's going to be fired up. They want to beat the Potters. They want some redemption. They're not going to be feeling great after losing to rival Washington. So I think they're going to come out with a little something to prove this week. I think the Redbirds get the win now. I know Potters fans are going to be all over me, but I think this is going to be a close game. The Potters will be very good this year. I think the Redbirds just sneak one back and get back on track for their season.
And we'll go ahead and go ahead, John. Yeah, I was just gonna say we'll kick it over to John then.
Sure, yeah. So my prediction last week was that Normal West beats Community. I was pretty happy when we were checking the halftime scores in the press box last week, and I saw that at the Wildcats were up. And, they hung on. And interesting note from that game was the final score was 21-4. And I don't know if you guys are familiar at all with the concept of maybe you've seen on Twitter this guy that runs this thing called Scoreigami. It's like how many final scores have happened before. Well, a 21-4 final score has never happened in the NFL, and I find it hard to believe that it would happen in college or high school as well. So, normal community only scoring off 2 safeties last week. Pretty interesting. I think that's a big correction. Normal West defense as well. But anyway, my prediction for the week is that Peoria High beats Community by 3+ possessions. And, when the year started, I think that, I would have said, man, that seems like crazy because, just Community has played so well the last couple of years. And, Peoria High has been right there with them. But not like, beating them by 21 points, type good or whatever. But I really think that, with Peoria's improved defense, and also, showing that their offense hasn't missed a beat as well. I don't think it's necessarily a big down year for Community. They'll still make the playoffs, and they're still a very good football team. It's maybe not quite as good as people have been accustomed to seeing in the recent past, but I think Peoria wins big against Community this week.
Great feeder into this one, John. We're going to go ahead and look at Limestone and Dunlap. People might be thinking, why is Limestone in here? They're 0-3, maybe not something to watch here, but I'm looking at their score sheet. Every team that they've played so far this season has scored north of 30 points on them. They're playing a team that's only scored north of 20 points once. I'm saying this game's going to be close going into the fourth quarter. Limestone's going to have the ball, and they're going down to either win or tie. And so I'm gonna take the Rockets to be in a one-score game in the fourth quarter, and I'll leave it up to the football god's hands if they end up going down to win the game or not. But I'm gonna take Limestone in a close game, 1 possession in the fourth.
Flaming hot take.
Hey, come on, we're stepping and hitting the midi this
week.
He's
he's been throwing himself softballs the last 2 weeks, so he's only.
All I can hear is 2 and 2. All I can hear is 2 for 2.
Whoa. Well, I almost picked East Peoria winning being my hot take, but I don't think that's hot enough. So I'm going to say Richwood's getting its first win over Notre Dame, the first win since on-field win since 2019. I think just the atmosphere of Dozer, even though it is the Shamrock Classic, technically a Notre Dame angled item, I think this is Richwood's time. They had a really close loss to Bloomington a couple weeks ago, and they have the talent at the skill positions, and I think they're going to get that win.
Fair enough. Well, that'll go ahead.
And my son came in here. There's my son.
Hey,
yeah,
how we doing?
Washington JFL 10U. I should get a hot take and say they're going to lose this week, right?
What?
No.
Wes Huett taking the opposition. Fair enough.
They played Notre Dame on Saturday at Mark Bill's school, so I'll be there.
Fair enough.
Saturday.
Well, guys, that takes us to the end. We're running a little long, so we won't have time for our new skit that we tried to incorporate, which would be Gen Z versus the 80s. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up with this. Again, for Cody Roskins, Gavin Russell, Jonathan Michael, and our guest from the Peoria Journal Star, Wes Huett, you've been a class act. Can't wait to see you later down the road this season. That's pretty much it for all we've got for episode 3, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.